Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Christy Taylor, founder of Work Solutions LLC and Work Global News Magazine. And I am so excited today to bring you another episode of our Changemaker series. Today, we are featuring Vera Cherepanova. Vera is the executive director of a nonprofit boards of the future and an award-winning ethics and compliance expert who writes and speaks about business ethics, workplace culture, behavior compliance, risk, and government. She is the author of Corporate Compliance Program, the first ever book on compliance in the Russian language, and the co-author of the Transnationalization of Anti-Corruption Law, as well as hundreds of articles on all aspects of ethics. Now, Vera is one of those people I'm actually going to read a little bit further in her bio because I want you to hear all of the cool things that she's done. Her insights have been featured on Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, Law 360, Compliance Week, and the Chartered Management Institute publications. Vera, I am so excited to talk to you today and pick your brain and just learn about all the awesome things that you do. So I'm going to hand it over to you so you can introduce yourself. Then we're going to jump into the conversation.
Thank you so much, Christy. That was a wonderful introduction. I don't know what can I add else because that was in a nutshell what I've been doing for all these years. But maybe just to add on top that I have been in ethics and compliance as a professional for more than 18 years. And I've been looking throughout these years, I've been looking at ethics and compliance from various angles. Obviously, I started as a junior and I was looking at individual behaviors and individual compliance, how employees in a company comply or do not comply sometimes and make their ethical or not so ethical choices. Then I started looking at mid-level, and now I'm looking at this at the very senior level, how executives, CEOs, and board members feel about ethics.
Well, I mean, look, I'm just so impressed with the background experience that you have. And I want to get into this discussion today with you about ethics and the pathway that you took in your career. Now, I'm a career and executive coach, but we do these Changemaker series to feature everyday people doing awesome stuff. But just the career coaching me, I have to ask this question. So you decided you have dedicated your career to ethics and compliance, as you mentioned, which is, it's not an area that, I don't remember growing up and saying, oh my God, I want to work in ethics and compliance. It's not something that you ever hear somebody say. It's often just an overlooked part of corporate decision making. But what initially drew you to this field? And you shared a little bit about your passion, but talk a little bit about more why you were drawn to that. Because I've never, and that's the truth, never heard anybody in my life say, when I grow up, I think I want to work in corporate and corporate compliance and ethics. So that's a unique career field.
Yeah, well, that's a good one. To begin with, a fun fact that I was not actually ever planning to work in ethics and compliance. The whole thing started quite unexpectedly because I was doing an internal auditor's job and I really enjoyed it after graduating from the university many, many years ago. And one sunny day, my general manager calls me in and says, like, look, headquarters wants us to do compliance. I have no idea what it is, but you're going to do it. And basically, I didn't have much of a choice, at that point of time. So I started digging in and I started looking at what that was about. And I stayed for so many years, actually. I really liked it, and it resonated, I think, with my personal traits. I was always a bit idealistic, and my parents can easily contest to the fact that they were very much amused by me being so little, 5 years old, 7 years old, and, teaching people what to do, what's the right thing to do, dad, don't speed, things like that. So I think it resonated on a personal level to an extent. But also, I trailblaze. I'm the kind of a person who has, many opinions. And I think doing compliance and doing anti-corruption work in a very corrupt environment, that was a path that was designed for me to a certain extent. Again, on a personal level, this is something what I do a lot. I wrote a first book in the Russian language on this discipline. Also, nobody else before me did that. And, it sounded quite crazy to a lot of people around me. Why are you even doing it? If everybody else is like giving bribes and, why do you even do it? But I always said, if you don't start with yourself, if I don't start with myself, how we're gonna push this agenda, how we're gonna
Yeah.
live better to a certain extent, So I guess it was about these two things.
Well, I really loved how you took the attributes of you growing up, and you already had these attributes of kind of holding people accountable, checking the boxes, and keeping people to encourage people to do the right thing, right? So you kind of shared those are attributes that you had growing up, and you took that and turned it into a career. I absolutely love that. Now, as you said, this is not something that people. It's not a field that people just readily jump into, or also sometimes are even really aware of what takes place behind the scenes. And many companies, they treat compliance as like a box checking exercise rather than a strategic function. I work in the healthcare arena, and I'm also have a background in the military, and so we're very like in the military particularly, right? We have checklist functions, and we do have high ethical standards that work all sides of the aisle. Now, from your experience in people treating this like a corporate checkbox, how do you shift the mindset and help organizations see that ethics is part of your competitive advantage?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think we as a profession has a lot of work to do. We have to work on our image outside of our bubble. And we have to make sure that people understand what we actually do, because we do a lot of ethical foresight thing, but not enough. And ethical foresight versus compliance hindsight, this is exactly the ticking the boxes and being just like on top of regulations. These are two very different things to a certain extent, right? And if we want to be present at the highest levels of corporate hierarchies, such as board meetings and C-suite meetings, we gotta connect much better what we do to the strategic imperatives in front of the organization, to the strategy. So what happens more often than not these days is that all of we call them defense functions. There are several lines of defense. You don't need to know that, but risk, compliance, internal audit, all of those functions, their main objective is to safeguard, to put some guardrails so that the business is safe, right? So that the business can actually achieve the strategic objectives. But what happens is that somehow the focus shifts, and these functions begin to sit separately, right? And they're like bubbling with their own stuff, and they're like in their own bubble, and not necessarily in touch with the overall strategy and with the overall direction of the organization, which is of course completely dysfunctional. So we all have some work to do. We as compliance professionals need to present ourselves as more strategic enablers. We need to prove to the senior level executives that we are actually not against any kind of innovation and strategic growth and things like that. So we just need to put in some guardrails so that everyone is happy and the objectives are achieved as we expected. And and the board members and the C-level executives also have a job to do to see that we are capable of providing them that ethical foresight, so that there is no crisis, and so that we do not have to do compliance in a hindsight just to put out the fires. Does it make sense?
Yeah, and you know what I want you to do? I was just listening to you talk. Now I understand all of this stuff because, again, I'm coming from the military, working in healthcare, working in different areas where more than a checkbox. But I want you to talk to the everyday consumer, right? Who's like, well, why do we need these rules and regulations and ethical compliance standards, right? In and out of the corporate room, just in everyday life. How does this trickle down? This level of ethics, because you are a change maker because you're holding people accountable, you're holding people to standards. But how does this trickle down to the everyday consumer? Like, of course, if I'm standing in the grocery store, I'm not like, oh, I'm so glad that we have ethics. I'm just trying to buy a can of beans or whatever. But how does the work that you do impact the everyday consumer in plain language for them, right? So, and the impact that you guys make in and out of the boardroom.
Well, I tell you what, in terms of the everyday consumers and us just being citizens, there are some surveys that actually demonstrate that corporate leadership is, well, I would say is on the brink of moral bankruptcy, if I may, because nobody trusts what corporate leaders say, right? And there was a very recent survey by Edelman. It's called Edelman Trust Barometer. They don't have a perfect methodology. I'm not saying that there are some, and this is only a survey, but I think they kind of got it really right, saying that 2/3 of the population they surveyed actually says that corporate leaders lie. They make exaggerated and misleading claims, specifically in the area of ethics and ESG, which also falls under that definition. Because if you think about it, ESG, this is the ethical responsibility on the organizational level. Mm-hmm. This is about how responsible the company is. This is about the company's ethics and the responsibility and accountability to the wider society, consumers, and other stakeholders, communities, environment, planet, many of them, right? Suppliers, yes, and employees, of course, as well. So people don't believe what corporate leaders say. Why is this happening? Well, because I think corporate leaders have been saying a lot without doing. Yes, so there has been a lot of talk without walking that talk. And ethics and compliance professionals are a very helping hand here, because we do understand the connection. First of all, we do understand the connection between what you say and what you do, and how much of a toll it takes on the ethical standing of your organization, right? Because what was happening before, and I think one of the main reasons, if you ask me, one of the main reasons why we got where we got with the ESG is just because we were not invited to the table to provide our input. And instead of that, the boards and senior executive teams were relying on PR support. With all due respect to PR professionals, you're doing a great job. But it's not only about pledges and commitments and glossy brochures. It's about something else. And somebody needs to tell you. Somebody needs to be at the table the moment you take that decision to put on that glossy brochure, and actually, keep you in check and say, people understand. People actually read and understand what you do, what you don't do, and hypocrisy is not okay.
Listen, I think that was a great point about the PR, right? Because it hits so close to home, because somebody's the first thing, every time something happens, the first thing people do, I see this with a lot of corporate companies, is you want to make a statement, and you send out the PR people, right? And then you make this blanket statement, but to your point, there's a lack of accountability. I want to shift this conversation to the work that you do as the executive director of this nonprofit, Boards of the Future. It's a relatively new initiative, but it's already gained traction. People are taking the work that you're doing and taking it to heart. What inspired you to launch this nonprofit? And I hear it just a little bit based in your answer, right, that you've already given. But what inspired you to launch this nonprofit? And what impact do you hope that it will have on corporate governance?
Yeah, so the whole idea, I think the whole idea started when I moved to the US, and I'm basically very new to the US. I moved to California just last year, which was not very good timing because I'm based in LA area. So because of the fires, the life was disrupted. But from any other perspective, that was perfect. And, it was great. California is great. Everything is great. So the whole idea came up because when we started go out in California and, professionally, personally, in whatever sense, we started meeting a lot of investors, right? And not ordinary investors, but California style investors, conscious investors, they call themselves, right? So every second person, I would say, in our area is to a certain extent thinks of herself as a conscious investor. And I started having discussions because they were asking me, what do you do? And I said, I do ethics and compliance. You should know, because you call yourself a conscious investor, you should know what I do. And the fact was that they didn't know, right? They had no idea. And I was asking them, why, how come, how you call yourself conscious investors, but you don't go further than a you need to dig a little bit deeper, and you need to invite the ethics and compliance professionals to talk to them. What is the state of affairs in this organization, how actually conscious this
That is
organization
a
is,
great
and what kind
point.
of yeah, and this is where it started, and this is how I secured the initial funding for the nonprofit. This is where I found my first donors, because people like had their eyes wide open and said, like, yeah, you actually have a point. We never thought about that. So the whole idea was coming from there. And Boards of the Future, well, we see ourselves as big facilitators, I would say, educators slash facilitators. We would like to help the ethics and compliance community to live up to the expectations and demands of the boards and senior level executives, and present themselves as board ready material, if you want. We would like to educate boards about what business ethics is, and why you should be taking care of it, and why you should be interested in having somebody other than having a financial acumen on boards, because to a certain extent, boards are run by accountants, right? It might have been okay previously when we were living in Milton Friedman ideas world, that companies exist only for profit and to keep shareholders happy. But times have changed. Yes, there are many more expectations of the organizations today. So basically, only financial expertise on the board is not enough. All right, so we want to diversify the boards, and we want to educate them on business ethics. And we also want to educate the investors, and we also want to demand investors to push some levers, because it does make a lot of sense. And investors really have a lot of leverage on the companies, because they invest money, they put their money, right? And they can demand various things to their liking, if you want.
Vera, I love what you said there about the conscious investor. And I even think about myself, and I'm not an investor to that level or anything, but when I think about, like, most of us, we do a very surface level of research on these organizations. So if I'm a conscious level investor, or if I want to know something about a company, I will just read a little bit about its because I'm an amateur stock investor, right? I'll just read a little bit on what the company's about. Oh, they save turtles, or what I'm saying, and I'm thinking, oh, well, that they're doing a good thing. Let me invest in this, and that's probably what you would run a lot into. People who really wasn't reading in depth. So that was such a great point. That, do you really know these companies that you're investing in? And so the work that you are doing is so impactful. Now, you've spoken about the challenge of getting more ethics and compliance professionals into these boardrooms, because to the point you just made, there are a lot of people that focus just on the accounting piece and the fundraising, right? What are some of the biggest barriers preventing this? And is it really that people are looking for the fundraiser professional? And how can organizations start integrating ethical expertise at the highest level? Because you do focus on that strategic level of integration.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are several things at play. I already mentioned that one of the barriers is perception, right? So when you talk about compliance, again, what comes to your mind? Checklists and things like that, right? So not necessarily you think about strategic growth and innovation and something sexy. It does sound like a broccoli. It doesn't sound like chocolate. It sounds like a broccoli, right? So one of the key things is to change the narrative and to show a little bit of chocolate side, right? There should be some broccoli, and I think the virtues like courage, integrity, prudence, they all have a little bit of broccoli side, right? But there should be a balance, and we should also demonstrate our more sexy side, if you want. Sexy for the people who are responsible for taking organizations further, right? Not to keeping them stale, but to keep them going, right? Taking them further. All right. The second barrier here would be the pipeline, and this point actually is, I think, is true not only for ethics and compliance people, but it's true in general. I think that boards need to reconsider how they build the pipeline and how they think about succession planning, right? Because what happens now is that to get on board, you need to know people, and recruiters are not really doing a great job. Nomination committees are not doing really a great job, because usually when there's an opening, somebody knows something,
Right.
and that somebody is gonna, be put there, right? So we gotta be a little bit more strategic. We gotta be a lot more diverse, to make sure that there are structured pipelines, and we consider various talent pools in the succession planning, which is a process rather than just based on, I know that person and whatever, and we will put that person in. So that's probably an issue that should be tackled by HR as well. And that's an issue that touches on the recruitment and search agencies that work with board positions. That touches on that community as well, not only, and that touches on boards, of course, because they also need to, get some interest and, put some focus in that area, so to say, and say like, yeah, we would like to have more diverse talent with us. Yeah, we would like to have a more formalized succession planning.
Yeah, you get into that HR piece. That's my wheelhouse there. And you know, I just think, to your point, is when we talk about the mixture of boards, and I'm just thinking about boards I've served on, or even organizations that I've worked for that have had these boards. You're right. There's not like somebody embedded here. You might do an, how most companies address this. It's that checklist method. You do an annual ethics training. You have a compliance checklist, but it is more so a check box. It is not a strategic strategy. And I love your point about that. This really has to be, if you want to focus on growth for the organization, this has to be part of a strategic plan, not just we have a mantra for ethics. We have an ethical standard. Here's our 5-point ethical standard. You actually have to have processes in place that adhere to that, and people that specialize in this area that can hold you accountable. Now, your work, it's not just this one thing. You do ethics and compliance from a variety of modalities. You write, we talked about some of your books, in the very beginning. You also speak, and you do advising on governance, compliance, and risk management. So what are some of the most concerning ethical blind spots that you see in today's corporate leadership, just based on your experiences?
Yeah, well, we touched upon it already a little bit. I think the disconnect between the stated values and what's happening on the ground is a very big thing. I have seen it a lot. I have seen it when I was working in-house. I have seen it when I started working for myself and running my own consultancy firm. I still see it, and I hear it in the discussions with board members and C executives. It's everywhere, right? It's everywhere. And exactly to your point made earlier, just having 5 points and having a code of conduct, which is somewhere on a shelf and collecting dust. And also a CEO coming to the town hall and making, grandiose statements, how much of an integrity she personally has, and we all have, etc., etc. And then you get your KPIs, and you have absolute certainty that it's not achievable in a good and ethical way, but your manager is going to be pushing you on that, because the targets are targets, and we all have to pay mortgages, and I don't know what, right? So targets should be met at whatever cost, right? So this conflict between the stated and the lived, and also the conflict between long-term health and short-term gain, these are 2 things that never go out of fashion, I would say, and they are always with us. Another issue is the compliance fatigue, so-called, that not so many people actually are open to the understanding that ethics and compliance work together, and it's not only about following the law, right? I hear a lot of times that if we are within within the limits of the law, what do you want? What else do you want? We're already there. But I hear it really a lot. What do you want from us? Why are you preaching us on ethics? Because also many people have a concept of ethics and morals being a very personal thing. And I have heard over the years, like, don't overstep your boundaries, because this is my personal thing. Ethics, I got them from my parents, from the church, with some religious organizations, some other places of which are personal to me. And the corporation has absolutely to do with my personal morals and ethics, right? So there are a lot of we have to do a lot of work in terms of educating everyone what business ethics is, and why we working in big and small organizations actually have ethical responsibilities as employees of that organization, and to whom we have those ethical responsibilities, to not only to our bosses and to the company itself, but also beyond the limits of that organization, to the wider community. There's a lot of educational work to be done, that compliance is following the rule, but compliance is bare minimum. Compliance is bare minimum. Yes, it's absolutely non-negotiable. If that was only about compliance, I wouldn't say we would have even have this discussion, because what's interesting in that discussion, follow the law. This is the rule number one. Number two, number three, you follow all three, goodbye. If you don't follow it, you're going to be prosecuted, and maybe you go to jail, right? So it's not that interesting. What makes the whole profession and the whole discussion very interesting is that compliance is just the bare minimum. And everyone is expecting companies not to be at their bare minimum, which is non-negotiable to a certain extent, but to go above that. And this is where the interesting things start.
Vera, if I were someone who sought out your services, right, to bring you in to consult, what is the first thing that you do when you come into these companies? You've had the conversation with the key leadership. Now you've been invited to come in and consult. What is the first thing that you do as a consultant when you're working with these companies and moving them through this process of getting on board with ethics and compliance as part of a strategic direction for growth for the company?
Well, we have a conversation. And we'll look at the organization from various angles. I like to use the argument of culture, because culture is really powerful. And I know, because I do talk to boards quite a lot these days, because I need to. So I know that they are concerned, because whenever something bad happens, whenever there is a scandal, journalists, media will immediately put their headline, "Where was the board?" Right? So they are on a certain alert, right? And they want to do a better job on that, and they understand that a lot of things actually come from the culture. We as a profession have evolved from thinking about bad apples to thinking about bad barrels, meaning that whenever there's a problem, I give you 99% certainty that this is not about a single employee, even if only a single employee gets caught. typically what's going to happen is that when journalists or other external people will start to talk to the employees of that organization, employees will openly say, "Well, this has been going for years. Everybody knew about it. Why are you even asking? Of course, we all knew one day it's going to spill out, and there's going to be a huge disaster, because it's going on for years." Well, yeah, and this is culture. Yeah, this is what a systemic issue is. Right? It's not about one rogue or one bad apple. It's rather a systemic issue. Usually, in 99, again, I repeat, percent of the cases, it is about culture. And we know that culture is strategy for breakfast.
I literally was thinking that in my head.
Yeah.
I was literally thinking that in my head.
So it actually connects all the dots, because if you're taking care, if you're expected to provide an oversight over the strategy and keep the company on track towards strategic objectives, you immediately need to take care of the culture. You need to have a very big interest in knowing and being aware of what kind of a culture that organization has, and you need the tools and instruments and skills to look into that. And if the culture is not to the level of your expectation, you need to understand how to work with that culture, how to change the culture, right? How to have that transformational change. So I do like the argument of culture a lot, and we as an industry have an accumulated knowledge and experience of all these tools and methods. We are a great resource. I wouldn't say that culture should be the responsibility of ethics and compliance professionals exclusively, because culture, to a certain extent, we all have a responsibility for culture, because we create this culture as employees of this organization. We co-create that culture every day by doing what we are doing, the ways that we're communicating, etc., etc. So, yeah.
This has been a fantastic interview. I'm going to ask you one last question. I always like to ask, I'm going to kind of do a two combo here. I always like to ask for our change makers in this series to kind of tell us a little bit about what you want your legacy to be in one piece of advice that you would give people. Because looking ahead, you actually plan to expand your presence here in the U.S. So you're just getting started with your board, and you're going to bring in some European governance practices like board apprenticeship programs into the conversation. So when you look ahead at the work that you want to do, as well as the advice that you want to share to others in about 60 to 90 seconds here, tell us where you're going, and any final thoughts or any major changes that you would like to see within the corporate governance structure within the next 5 years.
Yeah, I will do my best. 60 seconds. Okay, I would like to see more diversity on boards in any kind of characteristic that you would like to put there, in terms of age, in terms of professional background and expertise, in terms of color of your skin and your cultural background and heritage. You can take any. I just want the boards to be more diverse in any of those. All of them if we can, but any will do already something positive and bring positive change. I would like to see more ethics and compliance people on boards, of course, and this is my mission with the boards of the future. And in comparison to many people I talk to these days, I'm very positive, because I do know this is a very uncertain moment, and a lot of things seem to be upside down. But as people say, never let a good crisis go to waste. And this is my mantra these days. I'm focused. I'm trying to keep calm, and focus on what you're doing and do your job well, and it's going to work out. So this is probably, my best advice. Don't overreact. Try to stay positive. Positive change is still possible. And yeah, never let a good crisis go to waste.
I take that to heart. Never let a good crisis go to waste. I love that, and keeping a focused mindset. Vera, it has been such a pleasure to interview you today. Tell people where they can find you. Now, we're going to, of course, put Vera's information in the description box. We're expanding the magazine. We're going to be on multiple podcast platforms in the next couple of months. But where can people find you directly, and if they want to connect with you?
I'm on LinkedIn a lot. Please connect there. I have a website, www.veracherepanova.com. Boards of the Future has a website, www.newboards.org. Boards of the Future also has a page on LinkedIn. Please follow that one if you feel like it. Yeah, and see you around at conferences, at events. Please come forward, and we'll do hugs and handshakes. I'm very friendly.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love your passion. I was thinking about my own work, and the initial work that we through Work Solutions, which is to support social impact, right? And I had this whole thing on boards, and this piece that you spoke to about diversity, and I can literally go a whole nother segment with you, but we're going to end it right here. Thank you for being the powerful, positive change maker that you are. Thank you guys for tuning in. Remember to check this out on workglobalnews.com. That's WORXK globalnews.com, or you can even check us out at WORK Globalnews.com. changemakers.com. However you get to us, just read the story, share, like, subscribe, and have a great week.